Hey everybody, it's Mike. So today I want to talk to you about codependence. Shock, surprise. Don't worry, at some point I will get back to focusing on borderline personality disorder. I have to say, I found a couple of comments very interesting from people who don't like me talking about codependence and don't like me talking about what is wrong with the codependent, why they've sought out such painful relationships. But they love it when I just spend all my time psychoanalyzing borderline personality disorder and all of the pain that they cause and they love that. They have no problem with me going on and on and on about how messed up the borderlines are, but they get really bent out of shape when then I start looking at, but this is a dance. If you're with them, something's wrong with you. You wouldn't be with them if there wasn't something broken in you. They don't want to hear that at all. And so there's a few of you on here who don't like the idea of being codependent at all. You admit to having been with somebody who is clearly dysfunctional. For years, you've been with them. And so you have no problem with the idea that they need to be in therapy and they need to get help. But you don't like the idea that there's something dysfunctional about you. And a lot of you codependents like to believe that you are not as messed up. One person even said, I wouldn't want to be them. Okay, yeah, I have my problems, but I sure as heck wouldn't want to be them. And I think it's pretty inherent in some of the comments people have left that they feel superior to the borderline, and that's the reason they're there. That their love actually hides at the very least, a feeling of superiority, like I have it together and I have their answer and I'm going to save them. I'm going to caretake them. And I'm here to point out that whatever true loving feelings you may have and whatever true desires you may have to help and nurture, which of course is part of the dynamic, that there's also this unconscious condescension and superiority that you're going to fix them. So let's talk about what codependence is. Before I do that, let me just read what I thought to be a respectful and kind, I don't know about kind, respectful comment, and I'll go ahead and read that and I'll address his comment, and then we'll take a look at what the definition of codependence is. So this was in response to my video, Dating a Borderline, Why Your Unconditional Love is Killing Your Borderline Personality Disorder Partner. This person says, I just wanted to comment that I think you are generalizing too much. In my opinion, codependency is way more of a spectrum than BPD is. Again, I don't know what that means. BPD is a spectrum. I could go into some other comments where people want to say that, I don't, that I am identifying people with their disease and they're a human being and that it's a spectrum and not all borderlines are the same. And I've made it very clear that I believe that. So I don't know what you mean by it's way more of a spectrum. Anyway, let me continue. I'll read the whole thing, then I'll go back and look at it line by line. Meaning, codependency is not always about being a savior. In my case, I wasn't. Now, this is where I really appreciate it, because now he's going to talk about himself. Most of the codependents don't do that. And this is, you can tell, for me, if you want to come along with me on this journey, I'm going to say this. An unconscious, untreated codependent doesn't mean that they're not in therapy. It just means that they really have a lot of awareness of their issue. What they're going to do is they're not going to talk about themselves. They're going to point fingers at me, and then they're going to talk in generalities, and they're going to talk about this means this and this is that and you're wrong, and then they're going to attack me somehow. They're going to find a way to take something I've said about my life or something and try and humiliate me to make themselves look better. And they'll either be outright aggressive or passive aggressive. But they won't talk about themselves. In one case, one of the commenters refuses. I've asked very kindly. I said, so what are you? Are you a borderline? Are you a partner of a borderline? They refuse to say what they were or what they wouldn't. They're just, going to tell me how wrong I am. Which is obviously a pretty good sign that I've methinks thou dost protest too much. I've hit something. So I must be on the ball about something. Otherwise you wouldn't be so upset and so unwilling to look at yourself. But you will see a completely different side of me if you talk about your feelings and if you help all the rest of us know by sharing your personal situation. Here's I'm this and I'm that, and this is how I feel when you say this. It makes me feel like this. I'm going to have a completely different response to you because I won't try and talk you out of a feeling. There's no such thing as a wrong feeling. It's just a feeling. It's just a response. You can't help it. Your opinion might be wrong. You might state things as facts that are wrong, incorrect. But you can't be incorrect about your feeling. And I will be far more loving and kind to people if they're able to own their feelings. So this person is on the verge of that. But let me just read the whole thing here and then I'll come back and give you my opinion. And we will take a look, and I will once and for all give you the definition of codependency, and you can decide for yourself if you are codependent. Okay? All right, this person says, I wanted to comment that I think you are generalizing too much. In my opinion, codependency is way more of a spectrum than borderline personality disorder is, meaning codependency is not always about being a savior. In my case, I wasn't, meaning I wasn't a savior. My wife really mirrored many of my good traits, and first 2 years of marriage were best years of my life, when she didn't really split too often. Then tantrums became more often, leading to discard. I believe that you actually can be with somebody with BPD for a longer period of time and don't be actually codependent, but this is the question of how many traits do you need to display to fall into codependency definition. It's real simple, and I'm going to share it with you. There's one trait. There's one very simple definition, and again, you'll find out that according to that definition, it's inescapable. If you are in a relationship with a codependent for any length of time, by definition you are. If you are in a relationship with a borderline, sometimes I get my words mixed up. If you are in a relationship with a borderline for any length of time, by definition you are a codependent, and I'm going to prove it to you a little bit later in the video. So how many traits do you need to display to fall into codependency definition? This is a tricky one because of codependency is less known. No, it's not. Illness itself is less known than BPD. No, it's not. Which is really hard to research anyway. It was not approved into DSM, meaning I guess the definition of codependency. I would say it is rather dysfunction caused by events after toddler/infant, whereas BPD cluster B is strictly related to infant-toddler phase. Anyhow, I think that joining CODA and regular therapy after any relationship with any borderline is just good idea and won't hurt for sure. It's just good to stay open-minded no matter what. You can learn interesting things about yourself and become more conscious. So I can't really fault anything. He's not being, aggressive. He's not coming at me. He's stating his opinion. The real thing he wants to say here is that he doesn't think he's a codependent. So I wish that he had gotten more about himself and said, I don't think I'm a codependent. He kind of did say that. But now, before I go any further, let's just go into the definition of codependency. And again, I've made a blanket statement, and this is where people get very unhappy about this. They don't like the blanket statement. In fact, some people have gotten so upset. Bear in mind, again, I don't know you. I'm just some guy. Right now, I'm looking at a green light on my laptop. That's all you are, is a green light on my laptop. And I I am simply stating a general opinion based on my experience, observation, research, all the rest of that, about what is important to know about being with a borderline. And that is, well, after you get over looking at what borderline personality disorder really is and what's really going on in their mind and in their brains, so that you can realize that what you're doing is futile if they're untreated. Once you get past that, then the next thing you have to do is you have to look at yourself. In my experience, that enough, knowing, okay, there's something really wrong with that borderline, that's not enough for healing. Remember my original question that I ask all the time is, are you happy? If the answer is yes, don't waste your time watching my channel. If the answer is no, then whether I'm right or not is not as important as whether or not I've done something that has led to me being happy and fulfilled. If I have been where you are now, and you're in pain, and I have done something where I've been where you are, and I've found a way out and found happiness and health, I'm going to share with you the thoughts that I came to come to that conclusion. And if you want to try it out for yourself, go right ahead. Arguing with me about the definition of things is really quite a waste of time. The only thing you want to ask yourself is, are you happy? And if you can say, yes, I'm happy, then there's no need to be spending any time listening to me. Now, let's get back to the definition of codependency. Codependency, again, this is from Wikipedia, sorry. Codependency is a behavioral condition in a relationship. Codependency is a behavioral condition in a relationship where one person enables another person's addiction, poor mental health, immaturity, irresponsibility, or underachievement. Among the core characteristics of codependency is an excessive reliance on other people for approval and a sense of identity. Definitions of codependency vary, but it is generally defined as a subclinical, situational, and/or episodic behavioral condition similar to that of dependent personality disorder. I don't even know what that is. The term is less individually diagnostic and more descriptive of a relationship dynamic. So, core thing here is it says if you're a codependent, it means that you have to carry extra weight in order to be with somebody because of their dysfunction. If you're with a borderline, you are having to take an extra weight. You're having to deal with things that you wouldn't normally have to deal with. You have to be willing to sacrifice normal interactions in ways that you wouldn't in a, quote, normal relationship. It's a relationship dynamic. You are enabling them. Listen, there's nothing wrong with any of these words. There's nothing wrong with being dependent. There's nothing wrong with wanting approval and a sense of identity. There's nothing wrong with wanting somebody to love you. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. So when I say I'm a codependent, I'm not beating myself up. I'm in a state of recovery from maybe, malignant codependency. I didn't find a word. It doesn't matter. But if you are in a relationship where you are taking on more responsibility in order to make it work, where you have to take on more of the role of the caretaker in order to make the relationship work, if you are having to do anything in order to balance out what would normally destroy a relationship because of the other person's dysfunction, then you are a codependent. And there's nothing wrong with being in a healthy relationship where you are a codependent. Somebody asked, what about, somebody really didn't like what I had to say, and anyway, somebody said, what about two codependents happily married? And I didn't respond to that, but my response is, congratulations. I'm happy for you. This isn't what this channel is about. This channel is about people who are in pain primarily I'm focusing on the non-borderlines who are in pain as a result of the trauma that they experienced in the relationship. If you are able to handle taking on the extra responsibilities and taking on, the extra work that you have to do in order to compensate, that's what we could say. Let's put it this way. You're a codependent if the nature of your relationship means that you have to compensate, put more effort into compensating for the dysfunction of the other person. Then that makes you a codependent. Does it mean that you're screwed up, no, it doesn't mean any of those things. However, I'm telling you from my experience that when you're with an untreated borderline, and if we're talking about a borderline that's far on the spectrum, then we already know what they do is they split on you. And they overreact and they accuse you of things, and because of, they have an overdependence on you as well. So borderlines are by definition also codependents because, if we go by this definition, there is an excessive reliance on other people for approval and a sense of identity. So, one person, a borderline who's watching my channel, asked, maybe I should add another label. And I said, well, by definition, you already are a codependent. But, what we're talking about here is the person who takes on the role of the caretaker. So it's so ironic that a lot of the people who don't want to be labeled as codependent say, I'm not a codependent, I'm a caretaker. That's part of the relationship dynamic. You've chosen to take on the role of the caretaker. And I have to say that, even that, to say I'm in the relationship and to say that you are the one who is consciously choosing to be the caretaker, borderlines, back me up on this if you agree with it. Doesn't that sound doesn't that sound condescending? They're the caretaker. That by definition they see you as a helpless child. They're not looking to encourage you to be an adult. They're choosing. They could choose to be in a relationship where they're an equal. They're bypassing treating somebody as an equal with equal respect and equal, equal respect. And they're choosing to find somebody whom they can feel superior to, even though in their minds they're full of love and they're the caretaker. Anyway, but the bottom line is that codependency, as this says, is less individually diagnostic, meaning what you guys are saying, exactly what this guy says, which is, he says, by the way, I'm going to show you, this guy's my commenter, I'm going to show you where, again, your understanding of what codependence is and what your relationship is actually inaccurate. So you're actually telling me, by trying to explain that you're not, you're actually telling me by definition, not only are you a codependent, you're an unconscious codependent. And let's be clear, codependency is a dysfunction of unconsciousness. Nobody consciously chooses to go, wow, that person's really going to cause me a lot of grief and a lot of harm, and I'm going to act out all of my childhood issues with this person, and I'm going to end up really having my soul ripped to shreds because they're a borderline that's not in therapy. They're not going to do that. The unconscious mind doesn't work that way. It means that you're unaware. So one of the things I'm going to say is that codependency is one of those dysfunctions that tells you it doesn't exist. It's not like a cold. A cold tells you, I'm here. Here's the symptoms. Oh my God, I've got a cold. I don't have a cold. But, if you're a codependent, I've never known a codependent that said, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm such a codependent. No, their first response is, that's not me. I'm not like that. I can handle it. I'm okay. Anyway, so this person says that, codependency is way more of a spectrum. What he means by that is that what this says here, which is that codependency is less individually diagnostic, right? It means that it's not so much about what that person has wrong. It's talking about a relationship dynamic, taking on more responsibility than normal in order to make it work. Because if you didn't take up the slack in the relationship wouldn't work. So anybody who's with a borderline for more than 48 hours, by definition, has to be a codependent, because you are going to have to take up the slack in order to deal with the codependence, in order to deal with the borderline's inability, if they're untreated, to handle attachment, love, intimacy, and their strong and extreme responses to that. You know, the fact that you keep going back after they discard you is a relationship dynamic that wouldn't happen if you didn't have codependent traits, or if you weren't acting as the codependent. So, I'm sorry to say, I disagree with you. I still hold on to my belief that anybody who's been in a relationship with a borderline for more than 48 hours is by definition a codependent, simply because they've had to take on more responsibility to make the dynamic work, and that's why. Okay? Now, you can take that on and say, okay, so I'm not really all that screwed up. I'm really this, that, but yes, I have taken on the role of a codependent. If you want to tell yourself that, that's fine. I'm still going to believe. There's nothing you're going to say to me that's going to make me think on any level that there isn't something really deeply wrong that is being stimulated and brought to the surface because of the intense need of the borderline. So now I'm going to go back into your thing here. So codependency is not always about being a savior. Yes, it is. You don't know that. This is the unconscious part of it. I'm okay if you say, I'm not aware in the beginning that, you know, because again, when people don't want to talk about themselves, talk about yourself. Saying codependency isn't always, what you really mean to say is, in my case, I'm different. I didn't do it because I was a savior. Great. Just because you're not consciously aware of that doesn't mean that that's what isn't going on underneath your conscious awareness. That's the definition of unconscious. You're not aware of it. Codependents are extremely unconscious when they're acting on their codependent nature. So I'm okay with that. You say, I wasn't aware that I was doing it to be a savior. I wasn't either. When I was attracted to my borderline ex, what pulled me into it was the love bombing, was, I thought, the perfect love. I was totally focused on how much I was going to get from this apparently perfect individual. But that doesn't mean that unconsciously I wasn't aware of what was going on. Now, my body knew something was really wrong. And I chose not to listen to that red flag. The moment that, before I even met her, I knew something was coming. And then when she contacted me, I got really frightened, and my body really, got very upset. And old injuries started flaring up, and old tendonitis and things that, that to me represent unconscious conflict started flaring up in my body. I chose to believe that what was going, and I didn't know any better, I knew what I knew. But my unconscious mind was going, get out, get away. So my unconscious mind was right. My conscious mind was like, no, everything's fine. She's beautiful. She's got this going on. I'm just afraid of intimacy. Well, I was wrong. It's okay with me that I was unconscious. I'm not beating myself up for it. You don't like the idea. I don't know how much therapy you've had. You say that going to Coda is a good idea. Did you say that you're going to do that? Did you say you're going to go to Codependence Anonymous and work the 12 steps like your life depended on it? If you're willing to do that, I would recommend you do that too. I don't get the sense you're going to do that. You're sort of placating us by saying, it's always a good idea to do that. Are you going to do it? It's okay with me if you don't. Listen, I don't care what anybody does here. Now, Mike hasn't come out, and he's not being aggressive and coming at me and calling me names. Um, so, but I don't have anything against him. Do I think that you're unconscious? Yes, but that's just my opinion. It doesn't really matter what I think. If you're comfortable with where you're at, then who gives a crap what I think? So he goes on to say, in my case, I wasn't a savior. My wife really mirrored many of my good traits, and the first 2 years of marriage were the best years of my life, when she didn't really split too often. All you're saying, Mike, is that you were with a borderline who was idealizing you for 2 years. Congratulations. Most of us don't get that much, don't get that at all. But that's all that happened. And as we've looked at earlier, and when I talk about in my older videos about splitting, the idealization phase that they have is all projection. And you said it perfectly. She mirrored many of your good traits. That's what they do. Borderlines, when they're in, untreated borderlines, when they're in their regression, because they don't have an identity, because they're trying to run away from their pain, they're looking for somebody to save them. They become your fantasy. It's a facade that they wear. They don't do it consciously. They're not trying to lie to you or deceive you, but it's a way of functioning and getting people to love them, just like little babies do. Little babies do it all the time. It was a facade, and it lasted. She was able to keep it going for 2 years. All you're saying is that you're saying the same thing that everybody else has had, except in my case, it took a couple of weeks. In your case, it lasted for 2 years. That's all. So she had a more sophisticated ability to interact with a facade. That's all you've said here, my friend. That's it. You haven't said anything else. Do you get that? So you're trying to say that the reason why I'm not a codependent is because for the first 2 years, she didn't act like a sick person. She didn't act like a mentally ill person for the first couple of years. So therefore, I wasn't a savior. You're still a savior. Same way I was a savior. My first, for me, 2 or 3 weeks, I wasn't a savior because I was focused on, what she's giving to me and how she's making me this and how she's making me that, and she's so perfect. But underneath the surface, on an unconscious level, I knew what was going on. Unconsciously, meaning I wasn't consciously aware of it, I knew that she was messed up and I was there to fix her. Same is true for you, it just lasted for 2 years. But all you're describing is borderline personality disorder relationships. She was love bombing you for 2 years. Your experience was she was mirroring you. That's exactly what it was. It was mirroring, like those acting courses. If you're beginning to learn acting, you do the mirror exercise. She's watching you and showing you what you want to see. And it is narcissism on your part because, as you say, she was mirroring many of your good traits. You're not saying she showed independently really good traits about herself that I admired. She was mirroring your traits. It was narcissism. That's part of being a codependent. You're projecting and they're projecting. So she's projecting onto you, seeing you as this perfect whatever she saw you as, which meant for 2 years she was mirroring your traits. And you were projecting onto her, seeing yourself in her and not seeing her for who she was. We all do it, but that's what was happening here. And they were the best years of your life. Of course they were. And I'm not judging that. Of course they were. I mean, who doesn't want that? I would take that. I'd take that right now. Some woman showed up and she was beautiful and sexy and she mirrored my traits and loved to go surfing and loved to go to the gym and thought the same way as I did. And wow, yeah, go for it. Who wouldn't want that? At some point it's going to get real. Ideally, you're with somebody who doesn't have something as major as untreated borderline personality disorder, and it gets real and you work past it. The thing is that borderline personality disorder, as I've said in the other video, is if they're untreated and it's, they're far on the spectrum, at some point they will devalue you, and at some point they will discard you. And if I remember correctly, that's exactly what happened. So all you're saying here is, I was with your typical borderline, untreated borderline who did everything that all borderlines do. It just lasted for a really long time. You haven't said anything unusual. You're trying to tell me you're different than everybody else, and you're not. You're exactly like everybody else. All right. So yeah, in my case, I wasn't the savior, for at least while she was idealizing you. None of us are when they're idealizing us. My wife really mirrored many of my good traits, and first 2 years of marriage were best years of my life when she didn't really split too often. Then tantrums became more often, leading to discard, which is the same thing that happens with everybody. In the beginning, they idealize you until they can't hold on to that idealization anymore, and then they start to split. During the idealization phase, it creates both a superficial intimacy, which then leads to real intimacy. That's why they split. They split because the fake intimacy starts to become real. Your love actually does start to penetrate, and then they split. It just took you 2 years before it happened. And it leads to discard. And I've said that before. There are people who have been married for 10 years. 18 years. Eventually the final discard will come if they are untreated. That's not just my opinion. That is the opinion of borderlines in treatment who are saying that is exactly right. At some point, we have to discard you because we can't handle it. But they can't handle the intimacy. It's too much for them. They're saying that too. I was looking at that, coming to that conclusion by watching it, and I'm good at intuiting. I got a pretty good intuition. I'm pretty good at figuring people out. I'm not always right, but I happen to be right in this instance. And they're mirroring back to me that I was right. That's all that you're talking about here. It's the same thing anybody else has ever gone through. It's nothing different. It's probably pretty standard. Like I said, there are people that have been married for 10 years, 18 years, and then they get the discard. So you go on to say, I believe that you actually can be with someone with BPD for a longer period of time and don't actually be codependent. No, I don't think that's possible. It's an unconscious thing. Just because you weren't consciously aware of it doesn't mean that you weren't codependent. Doesn't mean that you were all screwed up and in pain and, oh my God, I need somebody. Doesn't mean that you were there. You're going to end up in that spot because it's going to get stimulated and brought to the surface. You'll eventually get there. But just because you don't feel that in the beginning doesn't mean you weren't codependent. Because remember, codependent is a dynamic. It's a relationship dynamic. In the beginning, let me put it to you this way. Here's probably a good way to put it. In the beginning, the borderline acts as the codependent because, as you said, they mirror your traits. They're trying to get your love and your approval. That was definitely the case with me. She was absolutely, totally focused, completely obsessed on whether or not she was making me happy or if I was happy, and what did she need to do. She even said, I want to be the perfect person for you. I want to make sure that I make you happy. I want to find out exactly what you're thinking all the time so I know exactly how to be. Now that was another red flag that I sort of bypassed because I was having so much fun. I thought, well, maybe that's a good thing. But the thing is, when the pendulum swings too far in one way and it's too good to be true, it's going to swing back in the other direction. Yours took 2 years. It was a very slow swing, building up momentum, and then it came back. Typical borderline codependent relationship. And now you've helped me understand how to describe it because in the beginning, the borderline takes on the role as the codependent. You will then take that role over when they start to split. But this is the question of how many traits do you need to display to fall into codependency definition? 1 trait. Are you taking up the slack for somebody's dysfunction? And or are they taking up your slack to be with you? In other words, trying to make you happy, mirroring everything to make you happy. That's a automatically a codependent dynamic. They just happen to be the one acting as the codependent. Are you having to deal with, they come to you and they say, here's a conscious one. Here's one that works, right? This doesn't mean a bad thing. This doesn't mean get out. They come to you and they say, hi, I am it's nice to meet you. I'm really attracted to you. Or we met online, blah, 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 out to having first coffee. So I should let you know that I am in treatment for borderline personality disorder. And so you should go look that up because it's, something you're going to need to know because, it creates some challenges in relationships. And then you look at it, you look it up and you go, oh, well, I really like you and okay, let's do this. And I'll try and understand and be there for you once you've done that, you're now in the dynamic. You're now in the dynamic where you are, as the definition says here, you are part of the relationship dynamic where one person enables another person's fill in the blank. This time you're doing it consciously. So there's unconscious codependence and there's conscious codependence. I have no problem, I have nothing but respect for somebody who chooses to consciously, they know this is what I'm dealing with, it's going to be challenging, I'm going to take on that challenge and I am willing to take up the slack where I can. I will support you. You have now consciously taken on the role of the codependent. It's not a condemnation. Just like, just because somebody has borderline personality disorder, they can't help that, whatever happened to them. The only thing they're responsible for is what they choose to do about it. And for somebody who's in therapy, who's aware of their condition, says, I have this condition and I'm doing everything in my power to work on it, but you need to know I'm going to fail. I'm going to do this and do that at some point. They're conscious about it, and that's not a condemnation. So I use the word untreated. I'm also going to use the word unconscious. One of the first things you know about an unconscious codependent is the first thing they're going to say is, I don't think I'm a codependent. You've seen that with borderlines. I have all these other problems, but I'm not a borderline. I'm not crazy. Stop calling me crazy. A disorder. And there are people get all upset with me, because I use a word. I'm just using a word because the word borderline describes it. I don't have to say human beings suffering from the dysfunction of borderline personality disorder. It's too many words. It's just easier for me to use the word borderline. Sorry if you don't like that. All right, so let's keep going here. This is a tricky one. I hear this a lot when I'm working with clients, and I'll say, if I can sense or see, something going on, I'll say, hey, whatever it is, you're not. It doesn't sound to me like you're being honest in this moment. What it sounds like to me is that this is what's going on, or why are you? Here's another one. When somebody's, typical. Why are you with somebody if they're, whatever, yelling and screaming at you or slashing your tires? Honest question of why are you with somebody like that? Well, it's complicated. It's really not all that complicated. It's really not all that tricky, Mike, the commenter. This is a tricky one because of codependency is less known. What do you mean? You're looking for reasons not to own up your own codependence. And then you go to the next one, which is again, pretty interesting. It's less known, which is really hard to research. That's BPD, is hard to research. Codependency was not approved into DSM. Okay. I would say it is rather a dysfunction. I didn't say what it was or what it wasn't. Codependency is a relationship dynamic. I mean, does that make it better that it's a dysfunction? I don't really care. Do you? Are you happy? Who cares what word we call it? And then you want to wonder about, was it caused after toddler or when you were a toddler? And you're looking for the difference. Again, what you're saying is, I'm not as screwed up as the borderline because theirs happened at infant toddler stage, whereas mine happened older. So it means that I have more coping skills, which means I'm not as screwed up. It doesn't matter. Are you racked with pain and misery? I was. So who cares? The end result of being with an untreated borderline is at some point they are going to have you feel, and you will take on the traits of the borderline. You will get worse. It's like an illness that becomes contagious. So who cares who's better or worse than the other? If I had stayed with my borderline ex, I would have ended up at her state. And I was already in a really bad state. I'm much better now because of the things that I do to achieve my state of being in a state of recovery. So are you happy? Great. Who cares? And then you go on to be my buddy and say, anyway, I think joining Coda and regular therapy, it's a good idea. Does that mean you're going to do it? It's okay with me if you don't. It's none of my business what you do or don't do. But anyway, you don't have to placate me, by saying that. Bottom line is, my commenter, you weren't. So I'm looking really deeply at what you're saying. You weren't at all, I thought, aggressive or mean or unkind. You were sharing your opinions. I would have liked to have heard more of your feelings. But now my definition of codependent. It is that it is a relationship dynamic. And yes, in all cases, you do take on the role of savior, meaning you take on the role of somebody who is going to be a caretaker. You're going to end up taking on the role of somebody who is going to take up the slack for the other person's dysfunction. Just because in the beginning they take on the role of the codependent doesn't change the fact that what that does is lure you into the state of being the true codependent, who's the caretaker, the savior, the one who takes up the slack. So, sorry, you are codependent, in my opinion. It's for you to decide. And your relationship is no different than anybody else's. You went through a long period of idealization. Then you went into, as you said, temper tantrums and splitting, which led it to discard. Nothing. It was textbook codependent borderline. Okay? All right. So that's my thoughts about that. Codependence. I don't know what else to say. I don't want to take up more of your time in this video. I've got more videos coming out, but that is it. Again, if you are if we're in a relationship for more than 48 hours, you are by definition a codependent. If that's, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Bottom line is right now, are you happy? Or are you like I was? I know that had I not done the work to get myself in a state of recovery, I would still be messed up, still be filled with pain, still be filled with a lack of identity, a lack of self-love, a lack of self-confidence, not knowing where I belonged or where life was going. That's where I would have been. That's where I would have ended up. And I would still be in that spot if I hadn't done the work to get better. So if you're feeling good, then you don't need this channel. If you're in pain, then my job is to share my experience so that you can feel better. Part of that is I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to give you the bitter medicine. You don't have to like it. I don't need for you to like me or approve of me. That's how much you can, you don't have to agree with me. If you come to the conclusion I don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine with me. Plenty of other channels. And let me say this, I say this on my other channel because even over there people get all upset and want to tell me how I don't know what I'm talking about, which is kind of the nature of social media and YouTube. But if you think I'm so screwed up and that I am causing all of this, problem, and I'm being, damaging and I'm dangerous and all that, don't waste your time, number one, giving me your unsolicited advice. I'm not asking any of you to tell me how to think or what to do. I've already got my own, I'm perfectly capable of coming up with my own opinions about things, and that's what I share. I love to hear people's experience. And, especially borderlines. If I get the sense that a borderline is honestly, truly self-aware and is in therapy, and if they contradict me on something that I say, I'm going to listen. I may agree, I may not agree. One of them was, I've made the assertion that borderlines don't really love you. Now, I could go on why I said that. I'll make a whole other video about that. But somebody came back and said, no, that's not true. We do love you. We love you intensely. We just can't handle it. We say all kinds of things we don't mean. And I went on to say, thank you for sharing. And so now I'm going to alter the way I talk about it. Because that's coming from somebody's experience whom I deem to be conscious and aware, who's done the work. You're untreated, you come on here, with flame coming out of your ass, and you're going to call me all kinds of names and tell me how I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and you're going to make blanket statements that are partially true. You're going to look for ways, to childishly win an argument with me. I'm probably going to come to the conclusion that you're an untreated borderline or an untreated codependent, and I'm probably not going to take your advice as meaning anything. I'm going to think that what's really going on is that you're in denial and you're angry with me and you want to, attack me in order to justify your own denial of what's going on. And that's part of the deal. Borderline personality disorder and codependency for borderlines is an intensely, painful emotional dysfunction, and people are addicted. They can't, they're trapped in some really, dangerous, painful, toxic dysfunction, just like an alcoholic or a drug addict. They're in denial. They can't help it. So I'm not going to judge you because you're untreated. That's the whole point. It's a dysfunction. It's a mental illness. It's a psychological disease. It's a whatever word you want to use. You're not at your highest, and you're not completely aware of what the hell you're doing. You can't help it. I was there too, but it doesn't mean I'm going to placate you. It's okay with me if you don't like it. So my three-pronged approach, which I will eventually get to, this link right here, I'm putting it together. I've been busy doing other stuff, but I'll get around to it eventually, and I'll create what people have asked. A lot of people have asked me to start counseling, and I don't feel comfortable doing that yet because I think people are better served going to qualified mental health professionals for both, and I think everybody should, whether you're borderline or codependent. But I can share with you what I've done, and I'll share some other things, some meditative and other physical exercises that I think help the brain and the body, and the nervous system get themselves together. And I'll share all of that, and I'll do that when the time is right. In the meantime, my three-pronged approach is: number one, go to therapy with somebody qualified to help you with codependence, whether you think you are or not, from cluster B personality, being in a relationship with a cluster B. Number two, go to Codependence Anonymous. Anybody can do it. Coda.org, CODA.org. Excuse me. And you can find Zoom meetings all over the world. There's no excuse not to be going right now, and work those 12 steps. Number three, have a spiritual discipline. Meditation, Tai Chi, yoga, church, I don't care what it is. Those three things: therapy, 12 steps, and spiritual discipline. Work those things hard. Be willing to look at yourself. Be ruthless. And don't coddle yourself. And you can be free of the pain, especially if you do that fourth step and that 10th step on a regular basis. I am free. There's a lot of the people that are upset with me want to turn it around and say that I'm still messed up. I'm obviously not over this, the trauma. I'm still in pain. None of that is true. I don't spend any time thinking about my borderline ex. The only reason I do is because I choose to be here on this channel because you've asked me to be here. And I actually have to work to think about it because the truth is I'm over it. In fact, it's really one of the few relationships in my life that I am completely over. I'm still not over the loss of my fiance who passed away. In fact, I bawled on the beach 2.5 years later as I was finishing surfing today. I cried my eyes out because I miss her so much. So I'm definitely not over that. But my borderline ex, who I thought was gonna absolutely destroy my life? Nope. I don't feel any need for her. I don't mourn her loss. I'm not angry with her. I don't judge her. I now really see her as somebody who was tragically fighting a really horrible mental illness that wasn't her fault, and I have nothing but love and hope for her, and I'll continue to send her good thoughts. She's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for me to have her in my life, but I hope that she finds the help that she needs. So if you want to be where I'm at, I love my life. I'm enjoying dating, having healthy sexual relationships and dating relationships and friend relationships. I haven't met the right person yet. You want to be free of that and be able to, do the stuff I never thought I was going to be able to do again. That's my approach. Therapy, 12 steps, spiritual discipline. And the last thing I'll say that you need to do in order to be happy is to help this crying little borderline over here. You need to just very softly and gently mouse over her little crying face and subscribe, and she will magically be cured. And you can go home and let your cape flap in the wind. Super empath, codependent saves the day. All right? That's it for me, at least for this video. Talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching.